Now, I must confess, even I was quite taken aback by the development yesterday afternoon when I thought the Pogues would have been quite happy about me defending them, whether instead it turned out to be completely the reverse. Let's talk to Emily Carver, political commentator, often a popular version of the Plank of the Week when she appears as the panellist there. In fact, she might be on it very soon again. Emily, very good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, how are you?
Very well, I'm very well, but I'm cut to the quick, obviously, by having been blocked by the Pogues. I didn't even know the Pogues had an official Twitter account. They don't actually have a blue tick, but I'm assuming it's run by somebody who's not actually a Pogue. It may be a Pogue fan that's running it. But there I was trying to help them out, trying to sort of stand up for reason and fun and Christmas, and instead I've been, cast off into the sidelines like Lawrence Fox, because I'm obviously far too right-wing for them.
I mean, it's quite amusing, isn't it? You couldn't really make it up.
You really couldn't. I mean, it really sums up 2020, doesn't it?
It does. They don't want you defending them,
No.
even though you're defending them, because I guess they're concerned that they'll be cancelled forever. So they've got to backtrack on anything offensive they've ever said in their entire lives, in their whole career. But yes, I'm sure probably some millennial running the account. So.
I know it's pretty bizarre as well, because it's the only song really that anybody knows that they ever wrote, Fairytale of New York, and the only reason it was successful was because of Kirsty MacColl, who actually was brought in by Steve Lillywhite, a guy that I know quite well, the producer of the song. And Kirsty MacColl's own mother has said that this whole thing is ridiculous. So I wonder if they've taken against her as well.
They probably have, these kind of debates don't stop at family. Families are torn apart over this kind of free speech versus cancel culture debate that's going on. But I think these type of arguments over songs like this and lyrics, they do come up time and time again. And people like you and I are accused of sort of whipping up culture wars hysterics. But this isn't just a one-off, is it? It speaks to a wider problem. And that's why people get so frustrated with kind of censorship. We had the BBC pulling comedy shows such as Fawlty Towers and Little Britain from their archives. We had the BBC banning football commentators from using supposedly racist phrases like nitty gritty. We all remember the attempts to censor Land of Hope and Glory and Rule Britannia.
Yeah, so I seem to remember I made you sing it at the end of Plank of the Week one time, which did rather well, actually, but people didn't see the funny side of it. They looked at us doing it and were like, look at these idiots, these right-wing maniacs, they're absolutely mad. They're frothing at the mouth. I mean, they just don't really seem to have a sense of humour, some of these people.
Well, I think it's true. I think it is a problem on the left as well, this lack of sense of humour. People are so concerned with causing offence. I went to a comedy night just before the second lockdown, and it was in North London, so you can imagine the type of politics that most of the people there had. But the problem is so much of the humour just wasn't funny because they were so terrified of saying anything that could be construed as being offensive. There was one guy who was about to make a joke about someone being fat or himself being fat, but he stopped himself because the crowd were looking rather shocked.
Yes.
So it's quite amazing how much comedy has been censored. We had Jimmy Mulville, who's the producer of Have I Got News for You? I think he came out this week to say that the BBC and Channel 4 are deliberately censoring their comedy output because they're so terrified of causing offence. And this is what's happening to comedy, and that's why you have the rise of sort of alternative comedy shows like the free speech comedy.
Right. Well, this is the thing, because Radio 1 have done what, and everybody else was like, why is everybody making a fuss? Well, the reason people made a fuss was because Radio 1 actually issued a statement and a tweet in which they declared that this was what they were doing. Now, if they hadn't done that, and they had just done it, as opposed to, telling everyone they were going to do it, people might not have even noticed. I mean, I don't listen to Radio 1, so I wouldn't know if they changed the lyrics of Fairytale of New York, but they told everybody they were going to do it as if that was more important than what they were actually doing, because it is more important to tell people, isn't it? Do you remember Ben and Jerry's telling everybody that they didn't back Priti Patel? They're an ice cream company. They've now got a tweet out, only they haven't learned their lesson. Today, I read a tweet on their account which was talking all about, the racial injustice of climate change, and how basically, people of colour are somehow affected badly by climate change more than they pollute the world. And it's like, you're making ice cream. What are you doing?
Oh yeah, after the death of George Floyd, they were putting out graphics, tweets every day, all day about how we need to dismantle white supremacy, how we need to check our white privilege. And this is coming from a company that isn't exactly squeaky clean itself, I've heard. No. I think it has some rather trouble.
Well, it's owned by Unilever now, which is known to be a very massive multinational globalist organisation, which, amongst other things, sells skin whitening cream to people in the subcontinent of India. And also, Ben & Jerry's has come out now and made a statement that they're going to suddenly start paying decent money to cocoa farmers who they've been ripping off for years and paying poverty wages to.
So, they should probably check their own record before they start telling us to dismantle our white privilege, whatever that means. But I think also going back to the fact that the BBC put this out as a news story, this seems to be something that our state broadcaster seems to be doing quite a lot whenever there's this kind of story, creating a furore in order to then, I guess, create more publicity for themselves, which is kind of strange coming from a publicly owned state broadcaster. You might expect it from a privately owned outlet. But this sort of, they ban the version of the song and then they report it as a news story on their own platform. It's quite an odd behaviour, and I don't think it's what most of the British public think our state broadcaster, that, let's remember, we all pay for, should be doing.
Well, exactly right. And in particular, at the moment, they've got this new Director General, Tim Davie, who people thought was going to be a breath of fresh air because he actually reversed the ban on Land of Hope and Glory, and they did actually end up performing it and singing it, even though they sort of made a bit of a hash of Jerusalem with some new lyrics. I don't know, it's this obsession with people on the left where they want to change everything, because there's a reason why lyrics are written in a particular way. It's a bit like looking at Guernica and saying, Picasso painted that in a terrible time. And what we should do is kind of take a paintbrush and change the bits that maybe look a bit nightmarish and a bit violent and change the whole piece of art because it offends someone.
Well, it's strategic, isn't it? If they ban the words we can use, then they will, by extension, start banning what we are thinking. And I think a lot of this censorship is most disturbing when it leads to this self-censorship that we see throughout our institutions, throughout businesses, throughout a society, that people feel like they can't actually put forward their views, often very mainstream views, for fear of then being cancelled or for fear of being, losing a job, losing a position, losing social status or whatever you might say. But I think this whole story, you might think it's just a silly story, it's just one song, but it does speak to this broader picture of free speech and where we stand in this country with it. You've got in Scotland the Minister of Justice seeking to bring in one of the most draconian laws, expanding hate crime laws, to include what we say at the dinner table with our family. And you have the Law Commission in this country, in England and Wales, proposing bans on offensive cartoons. So the state of freedom of speech in this country is not just a left-right issue. It's something that everyone should be worried about because it's deeply concerning.
It really is. And I mean, if you only got to look at what's going on in the university sector, in the way that everyone is being told. And funnily enough, I was talking to Neil Oliver about Scotland the other day, and he was saying that in Scotland now, because the SNP is more or less a one-party state running Scotland, all of the public sector, a lot of the academia, an awful lot of the kind of the what you might call the lesser areas like local councils are all so enthralled to the SNP that they daren't talk about anything other than that particular SNP independence agenda, because if you're an academic in Scotland, you really don't get any work effectively if you disagree with the government.
Well, I mean, that's really terrifying. Yeah, I don't know too much about what's going on in Scotland, but these hate crime laws are chilling. And the way that we have this sort of one-party state telling people how they should behave, what they're allowed to say. And obviously they've got their hands on a lot of the funding as well. So they're going to put their money where they want it so, and also censoring other people. So it's really quite shocking what's going on north of the border. And I think more and more attention needs to be brought to it because freedom of speech is really under attack in Scotland
and also here, because I think it's Basu, the Metropolitan Police guy, has come out and said something similar. Not to say that he wants Hamza Yusuf's Scottish hate crime law to be brought in, but certainly he's made noises to that effect. And they've also said that they want to bring in this ridiculous limitation on people talking about COVID in certain ways, that they don't think it's right that people should be, scrutinising or being sceptical about vaccines. Well, I'm sorry, you don't get to say what is acceptable to speak about if you're the police force in this country. That's not your job.
Well, exactly, and it's not just the police. It's also the Labour Party who wants to censor anti-vax messaging. You've also got the Royal Society, I think, as well, who was saying that we should stop people from spreading misinformation. But the problem is yes, it may be misinformation in this case, but at another moment, it might be censoring things that then become true. And it's sort of stopping any scientific inquiry and making us, all conform to one one point of view. And I think that people really need to start pushing back at this, even if it's not politically correct.
Yeah.
So I think that's the problem. You have every institution in this country, part of the liberal establishment, all agreeing. And that is really dangerous for pluralism and for, as you said, freedom of speech.
It's kind of what I call project-based politics, you know, and I wonder if it all started in Brussels and in Europe, where, for example, if you're not part of the European project, you're some kind of ghastly, horrible, selfish individual who doesn't want to share in the general good, you know. And I wonder if that's where it began, because we seem to have adopted that sort of situation here. When you got all the rows that we used to have with Ramonas and Brexiteers and all of that, you know, and basically Brexiteers painted as people who were narrow-minded, isolationists, you know, little Englanders, people who couldn't understand the wider good. And it's just completely wrong.
Oh, yeah, we definitely have this in terms of the lockdown measures. It seems to be the sort of Brexit argument playing out once again before our eyes. You've got the sort of nice people being pro-lockdown, or as they perceive themselves to be, and the lockdown skeptics being the evil types who don't care about people's lives. And things shouldn't be so polarized in that respect. We should be able to have a genuine debate, discussion over something like this, and it shouldn't be so polarized and have people, you know, going at each other's necks over this.
Yeah.
But that's the state of our country, isn't it? And that's the state of our media at the moment.
It is. But of course, interestingly, when you go into some areas of kind of lefty madness and the trans debate, and you get people like J.K. Rowling, who's previously been a great champion of the left, suddenly getting vilified and more or less told that she's a ghastly individual because she has a particular view. And other people don't. And similarly, Suzanne Moore, who's now left, I think, her job at The Guardian because of all of the hate that she's had.
Yeah, I know, that was quite extraordinary. Suzanne Moore stepped outside of the sort of the box of what you're allowed to say at The Guardian, and she had to leave.
Right.
And I'll be very interested to see what she has to say in the coming months about what happened there. But, you know, you've got so many things, you know, I've lost track of the number of terms we're now used to describe women besides women, you know, women with a cervix, people who bleed, people with cervix, whatever. All these terms. You had the BBC Radio 4 making the editorial decision to use the term fisher people instead of fishermen.
That was a great one. I've forgotten about that. That was this week, wasn't it?
Yeah, I know, it's madness. And I don't know who they're trying to appeal to. The BBC have a big problem, I guess. They're trying to appeal to a woke younger generation. Meanwhile, that woke younger generation are creating their own content. They're watching YouTube.
Yeah.
They're watching Snapchat and Instagram. They're not listening to BBC Radio 1 any longer. So I would say that the BBC should focus on what it does best and leave it at that, and not try to social engineer and tell people what they should and should not be watching. You know,
Right.
The BBC seems adamant on treating us like children, acting like it has the moral authority for one reason or another to tell the public what they can and can't listen to. And I find that to be more offensive than any lyrics from Fairytale of New York.
Exactly. But also what they're doing is they're apologising and banning something before anybody's actually complained about it, which is clearly what they've done in this case with the Pogues, because nobody's told them not to play it. Apparently they're playing it on radio too. So what does that tell you? Does that mean that the older generation are actually more capable of being offended and not bothered about it? It's not going to ruin their day. The only thing I can say, Emily, is that I've got some hope for the new generation, because my two teenage sons are pretty irreverent and rather enjoy making fun of people, rather enjoy comedy, which is quite brutal. And I don't know whether that's just because they're related to me, but I'm hoping that they represent, you know, the new teenage generation coming behind you.
You know, I hope so. I think my generation and maybe a few years younger than me are probably the worst. Everything is deemed problematic. And you start
where did it all go wrong for you? I mean, how come you're sensible?
I don't know. I guess I'll put that to my parenting, I guess. Or just my innate sense of being, you know, I'm very sensible. You know, look at things in the big picture. But it's true that people my age have the most extraordinary conversations about what's problematic, about what you can and can't say. Any kind of debate that could be vaguely controversial is shut down. You know, someone I follow on Instagram recently was having a sincere debate about whether fake tan was the same as blackface and whether she should stop using fake tan because it might be deemed offensive to any of black followers. So this is the kind of conversation that people my age are having on social media, rather than, let's say, talking about how we're going to get out of this COVID crisis and
whether you're going to get arrested for saying the wrong thing to somebody in the street. You know?
Yeah, I mean, it's just quite extraordinary, the kind of the lengths people go to virtue signal on matters that really are just so minor. And I'm not exactly sure who they think they're trying to defend. And I'm not sure who all these people are who are offended by the lyrics that we're talking about today. It's such a small minority, but I think the BBC is just trying to virtue signal, and perhaps they're just trying to bring more traffic to their to the BBC Radio 1. Perhaps it's not getting as much listeners as it used to.
The trouble is now I don't know whether I want Fairytale of New York to be number one or not, because yesterday morning I did, but now I'm not so sure. Because as somebody pointed out yesterday, if they're that keen on espousing, greatness and goodness and virtue, the Pogues really ought to give all of the money that they've made off this terrible, ghastly, bigoted song of theirs and give it to some charity of my choice, shouldn't they?
Oh, but of course they will never do that, will they?
No.
They'd rather block you and seem virtuous. But I think you're right. I think this is going to be counterproductive. Has it become number one yet?
Well, not yet, but it may be a Christmas wish too far. Emily, thank you very much indeed. Emily Carver, political commentator and very sensible member of what can only be described as the millennial generation, because it's all gone a bit wrong for the rest of them, hasn't it? They're all offended by this, offended by that, offended by the other. I mean, what you can be offended by about a Christmas song, for heaven's sake? It's bad news for all sorts of other Christmas songs, I would suggest.